Back in the 1970s, one of my friends had an old ratty RV that his dad had given him for his 24th birthday. We decided to drive out into the middle of the desert with some hippie chicks we knew at the time and watch a forecasted meteor shower. It was basically an excuse for us to take drugs and fuck away from anyone else. For most of us, we were just beginning to get full-time jobs, paying for our own places, and judge us as you like, settling down with families, and I think we were trying to hold on to that youthful freedom that was slipping away from us so rapidly. There was 8 of us all together, divided nicely between 4 guys and 4 girls. Most of us had known each other for years, some since childhood, and we weren't strangers to having intimate moments with one another. We drove out to the desert, which was 4 or so hours away from our town, and set up a bit of a distance away from the other stargazers and amateur astrologists. We were all messing around and basically having an orgy, sorry for the grisly details, when a bright flash emanated under the closed curtains of the RV. We assumed it was just a meteor shower and continued. Again it happened, and again, and again. One of our group members decided to have a peek under the curtains and said he saw something odd. We basically all stopped, knowing he wouldn't just talk crap, and looked through the curtains ourselves. I saw it with my own eyes. A disc-shaped object with a hollowed centre. If I had to describe it today, which I am, it looked like a CD or DVD, except shiny silver and 3D like a button. Now, I know it's not the best description, but it was looking like nothing I or any of my friends had ever seen. It was super high-tech looking, and the entire craft appeared to be made from one solid piece of material. It was flying erratically, a tail emitting from its back end. It began to descend wildly, and we all ran out of the RV, wrapped in towels and duvets. We watched as this craft bombarded with a small, rocky hillside about a mile away. A small cloud of smoke rising and disappearing against the blanket of the night sky. We didn't say a word to one another. Our look said everything as we all rushed to get dressed and ran all the way to the hillside without stopping. Our adrenaline was just too much and the cool air rushed against us. By this point, we were missing the meteorite shower, and searing streaks zipped above us like silent fireworks as we ran to the hill and were looking for the crash site. We were all discussing and saying how we hoped anyone involved in the crash was okay, assuming it to be a light aircraft of sorts. However, I'm sure most of us, if not all, secretly knew that what we had seen was a UFO. One of my friends noticed a low light and a small plume of smoke nestled between 2 rocky hills and masked by some dead bush. As we began to proceed towards the crash site, a tall, young, fair-skinned blonde woman wearing a flowing white gown stopped us, calling out with a soft voice. She held herself oddly, as if struggling to keep a pose. She was beautiful though, not a blemish to be seen, with perfectly proportioned features, lovely symmetry to her face, and skin that literally seemed to glow, soft hues radiating unnaturally around her body. All of us, including the girls with us, seemed in awe at the natural beauty this mysterious woman had. I was the one who spoke to her first. "Did you see that plane crash over there?" I said, pointing towards the crash site, the panic of the incident suddenly flooding back. "We need to see if they need help." The woman looked at me for a moment, undressing me with her eyes. She spoke softly once more. "I saw no crash. That's our party's campfire. We came to see the meteorite shower. Nothing has crashed here." I looked back over the bushes and could clearly see a hunk of metal sticking out of a shallow crater in the ground. Something wasn't right about this woman. "What, and you dug a hole for this fire and put metal in it?" I retorted accusingly. She said nothing, just stared deep into me. I had had enough and began to walk over, shouting over my shoulder that I'd check it out for myself. No! I nearly hit the deck. That shout was louder than anything humanly possible. It was high-pitched and painful. When I looked back, the mysterious woman stood, unmoving. My friends were down as well, clasping their ears, looking at the woman like she was a psychopath. I turned back around and walked into the chest of a man about 6.5 feet tall, with long golden locks, the exact same colour as the woman's. He was wearing a tight white t-shirt and white cotton pants, and was as beautiful as the woman. "What's the problem?" he said, his gorgeous voice even melting me. "I need to help these people. The ones in the crash," I said angrily, pointing at the crater again. His facial expressions did not change. "A crash? There's been no crash. That there, it's our campfire." I was the only one arguing. My friends kept their distance, huddled together as if these two mysterious people were wolves, closing in on the kill. "I saw it. We all saw it with our own eyes. I'm going over." I didn't move. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared of these people. "Are you sure it wasn't a meteorite?" he asked smoothly. I was about to start shouting abuse at this guy when one of the girls, it just so happened to be the one I liked most, shouted over, "Jack, just leave it. Let's go." I looked back at my friends who were all visibly scared and cold. Could I really leave this crash? I was doubting myself at this point anyway, and didn't think this guy was just going to let me past him either. "Fine, let's go," I said, defeated. We walked the mile back to the RV. The two mystery people stood side by side, watching us as we left. All of us were saying how creepy they actually were, how something didn't quite seem right, and how afraid we actually were. I particularly brought attention to the fact that they had glowing skin, like something from a nuclear disaster. We got back to the RV and couldn't even ring any authorities because this was a time before cell phones. One of my friends looked out of his binoculars that he had brought for the shower and said he couldn't see the people now. They had gone, probably into the small canyon. The next morning, we took the same drive back and stopped off at the other campers that hadn't already left. We came across 3 in total. 2 of them hadn't or denied seeing the craft, despite inevitably having their eyes glued to the sky, and the other group claimed they saw it but that they don't remember it too well, assuming it was the first meteorite and thinking they were probably all going to look similar. One of them remembered it being shiny but also said he thought it might have been the reflection of artificial light or moonlight. They didn't seem as in awe as we were and acted like it was nothing. However, they never met the beautiful people we had met. And that was it, our last chance of a true explanation gone. We talked about it in the future get-togethers to come, but despite the point of that trip, growing up eventually got a hold of us all and, for the most part, we drifted from one another. I know that 3 of the people there that night are now dead and 1 has Alzheimer's. 2 of the others I have lost contact with and, for all I know, could have forgotten or could be dead themselves. The other is my wife, the girl that night that told me to leave it. Yeah, we got married. One thing bothers me more than anything that happened that night though. I can't help but think, now I'm nearly 70, that once me and my wife pass or succumb to age that our story will be lost. We have no children and sure, I've now shared it here, which was difficult might I add. I'm no Silver Surfer, but no one reading this was there. No one actually saw it. For all you know, this whole story was a lie and I made it up. And that's tough for me to think about, having actually experienced it firsthand.
I'm a British Argentine, living on an island I'm not going to name for safety reasons, in the Tierra del Fuego archipelago, right at the southern tip of both Argentina and Chile. I live in the part under the Argentine flag. I originally moved from the UK to Santiago in Chile for work, but moved to the southern tip of Argentina soon after, pursuing a similar job and preferring the country due to my mother's family hailing from there. It's a long and convoluted story that's irrelevant, but let's just say I had a connection to Argentina. After a highly successful career, I retired early, in my mid-30s. That's when I moved away from the hustle and bustle of Buenos Aires to the secluded islands that I now relax on. This incident was a one-off, and since seeing this UFO, I haven't seen it or heard of anyone else seeing it since. It was springtime, and my partner was away to visit family in the capital, and I decided I'd take my boat and go fishing for a couple of days alone to detox and relax and do something I love. I set off in the early morning, at the same time as my wife. The island we live on, as I said earlier, is small, yet we lived inland, almost in the middle. I owned a boat and took it on a trailer attached to my truck and took the short drive to the easternmost beach. I used the boat ramp to get my boat into the water, and off I went. I spent the day tossing the lines and traveling to various parts of the ocean. That night, I was adrift miles from any land, in the middle of the ocean. I was in my cabin, watching the small, fatback TV I had, sat at the small table eating my dinner. My boat swayed to the gentle rhythm of the waves. Usually, on my fishing trips, the worst that would happen is that some strong rogue waves or a storm would have my boat rocking fiercely. But this night was different. There was a blinding flash of light from the porthole above my head. I thought it must have been lightning, but it hadn't been raining when I was up there before, and the water still seemed calm. I poked my head up to the circular window and gazed. It wasn't raining. The skies were clear. What I saw was outstanding and defied my comprehension. I thought it was a meteor, a large flaming ball trailing through the sky and plummeting into the ocean, sending a rippling wave shaking my boat. I immediately went to the deck and began heading towards where this object hit the water. It took me about 10 minutes to arrive, and as I was approaching the area, I began to see debris in the water. Stuff that wouldn't be from a chunk of space rock. Floating in the open ocean, far away from anything, were floating pieces of what I could only describe as metal and plastic. I thought the worst at first, thinking the meteor may have collided with a boat and obliterated it, but nothing led me to believe it was a boat. No wood, no sails, no nautical debris of any kind. Just this expensive-looking high-tech material. I had no way to contact any authorities out at the ocean, and it wasn't safe for me to return to land in such darkness. However, the next morning, I was up early and returned to the island, contacting the authorities and taking them out to the exact spot, but it was too late. All the debris had scattered. I know, this isn't the most definitive UFO encounter, but I believe strongly that what crashed into the ocean that day was a UFO. Extra-Terrestrial, or a government test, I don't know, but the more I've mulled things over in my head since, the more I'm sure that what crashed wasn't a meteor.
Me and my husband both hail from Basingstoke, a lovely little town in southern England. We had been together nearly a decade when we married in 2004, and somewhere we had both always wanted to visit was Australia. Specifically, we both wanted to see southern Australia and see places like Adelaide. So after our marriage, the next logical step was for us to visit Adelaide for our honeymoon. We set off and arrived about 2 weeks after we had first wed. We were set up in a lovely hotel, pretty central in the city. Altogether, we were there for a fortnight, and one night in the middle of our trip sticks out to me the most. Something that I'll just never forget, and something that blows my mind. We were exactly halfway through our honeymoon and had spent the day at Moana Beach, which had been super busy all day. So, after dinner, my husband proposed we go to another beach that same evening, a beach called Rapid Bay. My husband told me how it was supposedly quiet and serene and peaceful, a beach that was about a 2-hour drive away, and we finished dinner at about 5 and headed off, hoping to get there by 7. The drive was hot and uneventful in the rental, and we arrived at about 7:30 PM and, not being familiar with the place, accidentally parked about a 15-minute walk away from the beach. By this time, the sun was beginning to set, and it was at the point where it wasn't dark but was heading that way. It wasn't dusk either. It was sort of dark, but you could still see. I don't know the word to describe it, if there even is one. We enter the bay and it's totally empty as far as the eye can see, except for one group of revelers way out at the far side, to the point we couldn't even hear them. We set up close to them, but not too close to be imposing. Me and my husband aren't dicks and would have sat further away, but the area where we set up was so idyllic. As I say, we were far enough away to not even be able to hear them and sat with food and drink on the beach. My husband was the one who noticed it first, as I had my back to the bizarre group who accompanied us on the beach. "Look over there," he said, pointing discreetly. I turned to see the group of a dozen or so people, all dressed in the same black outfits that seemed to blend with the night sky and all wearing sunglasses. In the dark. I wouldn't have been able to see them properly if not for the glow of their campfire. "They weren't all wearing black before, were they?" I asked my husband, trying to remember. He admitted that he didn't pay attention and was himself unsure. The group were all stood in a large circle, holding hands, eyes glued to the skies. Well, I assumed they were because their heads were tilted back and they were looking up. I felt tense and kept watching them as my husband and I tried to have a good time before we had to leave. About 5 minutes passed when 2 huge lights, one red and one white, began flashing slowly in the air out to sea. It glided over silently, otherwise I'd have assumed it was a passenger plane, and came to a hovering halt above the party of stargazers. Me and my husband were in shock, and my mouth was agape. Immediately, the hovering craft, which we couldn't make out at all, let alone identify in the dark, stopped flashing its lights and instead left them continually shining, illuminating the group on the sand. They let go of each other's hands. Some shielded their eyes, others eerily expected their fate with open arms. Then there was a blast of scorching white light and a gust of wind so powerful it sent me and my husband toppling. And then it was dark again. We looked over to where the group had been and couldn't see anyone, though the fire had been extinguished. My husband told me to wait here and ran to investigate. There was no sign of them, but there was empty beer bottles and leftover food scattered around in the wind. Peculiarly, there was also a large ring of sand that was darker than the surrounding sand, roughly in the same area we agreed the people had been stood. We phoned the police and waited for their arrival. It was late now and I was cold. We explained everything to the best of our abilities, from the weird craft, the people's attire, the blinding light, and even showed them the ring of sand. But they looked at us as if we were insane. We may have considered we were if it wasn't for the fact one officer told us that the blinding light matched descriptions of a disturbance other residents had called in. The experience plagued the rest of our trip. I was struggling to sleep and was pretty paranoid about it all. I even had some bad-looking sunburn on my back that looked streaky, that me and my husband believe was caused by that freak light. I don't know what came of it all. Once we got back to England, I tried my best to forget about it, and the authorities never got in touch. As I'm aware, he never made any papers either, but I'm unsure. For all I know, it may have. One thing I am sure about, though, is that I will never go to Rapid Bay ever again. Me and my now ex-girlfriend were going through a rough patch in our relationship 2 years ago. In an attempt to rekindle our relationship, I took us out to a cabin retreat in the woods for a few days of romance and togetherness. We got there late one evening in the blistering rain and settled down into the cabin, hitting the hay pretty much immediately. Our plan for the next 2 days was to stay in and chat and fuck and cuddle. As such, we brought all the provisions we thought we'd need with us so we wouldn't have to leave the cabin. Good job we did, as the next day there was flash flooding further down the trail, pretty much preventing us from leaving anyway. In the day, a storm raged continually and our fire burnt out. I realised I had left the firewood in the truck parked outside and knew I had to go out to retrieve some. Trees had blown over, lightning was striking and rains were so hard it hurt, but I knew we needed the warmth of the fire and I needed to look macho for the sake of my relationship. I went out and braced the storm. I was a feeble ragdoll in its grip and it dragged me all over the place, making me fall over and pushing me against trees which I then used for stability. I managed to climb into the truck which rocked vigorously. I bundled up all the firewood and pocketed some batteries and matches I noticed I'd left and sat contemplating my best course of action. The window was steamy and covered in rain bubbles, but I looked out and was covered in goose flesh at what I perceived to be a tall man in a long black coat disappear around the edge of the cabin towards the master bedroom, where my girlfriend was laying nude. I quickly burst out of the truck, slipping on the swampy terrain the heavy downfall had created and landed flat on my back. I crawled my way back up, still being flung about by the gale force winds. I managed to reach the door which I had left unlocked and slammed it shut behind me and locked it rapidly. I ran to the bedroom, muddy coat and shoes still on, and parted the blinds ever so slightly. I could see no one. It was perfectly acceptable to believe they had ran off or had seen me and didn't stick around, but I checked the other windows in the house to be sure. How was someone just walking about like that? I tried to look for footprints in the mud which gave some clue as to the direction the person travelled in, but there was none. I settled down, my girlfriend asking what was the matter with me. I reassured her that I was just watching the weather, no need to make her uncomfortable. That night, there were many bangs and clanks. As I lay in bed, my girlfriend already asleep, I tried to put myself at ease. I knew they were from the storm raging outside, but a subconscious part of me was associating them with the man I had seen earlier that day, as if he was going to break in. After a while, my mind began to calm and slow, and I found myself slowly drifting off. Tap, tap. My eyes widened in the dark. Those taps seemed out of place, but I couldn't explain it. I had a go at myself internally. It was just the wind, stop being an idiot. Again, I slowly began to fade into a slumber, when the same identical knocks rung out again. I sat up in my bed, the lights still off, and scanned the room, the wind howling outside. Bang! A loud bang of wood against wood shook the cabin. I jolted in the bed and looked at my girlfriend, who hadn't even stirred. I slipped on my slippers and went over to the bedroom door, hunting knife in hand. I opened the door and walked down the wooden corridor towards the lounge. As I got to the lounge, the sound of wind and rain increased, howling like a wolf. I turned on the lights in the lounge and was faced with the cabin door, flapping open in the wind. The lock and chain were not broken, the chain hung swaying. I gasped and ran over to the door, slamming it shut and relocking it. I knew it was locked. I had locked it. I pulled out my cell to call the police. No reception. I turned quickly to go and wake up my girlfriend, and that's when I saw it, defined in the darkness of the kitchen against a lone burst of lightning. The tall man in the long black coat. Except it wasn't a man. It was a thing, 7 foot tall and with hot red eyes. Its coat was actually just it. Slick and dull, running down the entirety of its body and sticking out in jagged daggers at the bottom. I wasn't sure if it was hair or skin or what, but it wasn't something I'd ever seen before. I screamed and flipped on the kitchen light. Nothing was there. I was hyperventilating and my main concern turned to my girlfriend as I heard a seriously panicked scream from the master bedroom. I zoomed up the corridor, bursting through the door, wielding the knife. "Where is it?" I shouted. She pointed to the window, the covers pulled up to her eyes. I looked out the window and way off in the tree line, I saw two fiery red eyes between the lashings of rain. They slowly faded into the darkness. We had to wait to the end of our trip to report this to a park ranger. What he told us creeped the hell out of me. He said that we weren't the first to report something matching the description we had seen. At first, me and my ex were relieved to know we weren't crazy, but then, angry that we hadn't been forewarned. He continued by asking us if we had seen any lights in the sky or odd-looking planes or aircraft. We said no because we hadn't, and he continued saying that most reports had also mentioned unidentified aircraft overhead. He then joked about it being aliens. But what if it had been? The thought lingered in my head. What if it was aliens? What if I had seen a being from another planet? The thought still sends chills down my spine. There is a lot of stigma when somebody comes out and claims that they were abducted by extraterrestrials, especially if that person is a middle-aged lonely male introvert who has a mild addiction to sci-fi and fantasy. Cue me. I'm Peter and I'm 45 years old and this is the story of my abduction. I live in my own small dingy apartment in the basement of a larger apartment building. This place was the only place I could afford, but its windowless location in a rough estate never helped my anxiety. I work as a telesales assistant at a small insurance firm in the town centre of the town that I live in. It's shit work, but it just about pays the bills. Now, like I say, I really enjoy sci-fi and fantasy, and whilst excited by the thought of humanity not being alone in the universe, honestly, I never put much stock in it. You could ask anyone I know, you won't since I'm writing this anonymously, and they would tell you I'd never make something like this up. In fact, I hate attention and fame, and I'm only writing this to get it off my chest so I don't feel so crazy. For the last 5 years of my existence at that apartment, I had pretty much had the same dull routine. Come home, eat ready meals, shower, watch TV or read, and sleep. This night was no exception. I had just finished watching something on TV. I forget what, but it might have been Tales of the Unexpected, and was laying in the darkness of my room, attempting to settle down for sleep. As I was finally dozing off, I noticed, from my peripheral vision, a light from the crack at the bottom of the door. Even more unnerving was the shadow partially blocking the light out. A shadow that was moving, swaying almost. I turned quietly to look, not making a sound. I glanced at my phone, wondering if I should attempt to grab it. Suddenly, my door swung open, splintering and smashing hard off my bedroom wall. I jumped up in my bed and curled into my duvet, the light blinding. It dimmed slightly, or my eyes adjusted, I'm unsure, and there, stood in the doorway, was the most inhuman-looking human I'd ever seen. I quickly learned it was not a human as it entered my room, tall, slender and shiny black. Its skin looked slippery and wet, like an amphibian. Its details, like eyes, hands, feet and ears, were massively oversized, and the eyes specifically were jet black. I curled away, closing my eyes, wondering if I was seeing it or if it was some sort of fucked up lucid nightmare. I heard its feet slapping off my laminate flooring, and I turned back around, unable to resist the urge. It was right up close to me, and it placed an elongated finger on my forehead. Next thing I remembered, I was waking up in my bed. I looked at my phone, and it was 8 AM. I remember going into my bathroom and seeing that my nose was bleeding and that I had dried blood on my cheeks, as if originating from my ears. I'm not hiding anything from you here. I honestly can't remember what happened to me, but I believe I was abducted by aliens. It sounds like a ridiculous statement from the evidence I've given you, but one more thing happened that is totally crazy, and I don't expect any one of you to believe it. Well, anyone not wearing a tinfoil hat at least. It's so unbelievable in my opinion that I almost omitted this from my written account, but I feel it's just too important to erase. A few days later, I was drying my hair after a shower when I felt something uncomfortable on my neck. I assumed it was something like a staple or paperclip from the office that had stuck to my neck with the wet from the shower. I was horrified to feel it was a lump under my neck. Disgusted, I took a loose razor from my wash bag and carefully sliced the back of my neck where the protrusion was. A small fragment of metal fell out and, to my dismay, landed in the sink and slid down the plug hole. I only caught a brief look at it. It looked like a shiny, glossy metal blob, but it might have looked like that because my neck was wet from the shower and the object itself was wet from my blood. I have never served in the military, had a car accident, had any neck injury in the past, or anything else that could explain a piece of metal being lodged in my neck. Unfortunately, as always seems to be the case, the evidence was lost. I know how unbelievable it sounds, I really do, but I still have a small scar on my neck from where I performed my own removal. Possible alien tracker, or just a piece of metal I got stuck in my neck without realising. Knowing my life like I do, both are as unlikely as each other. And I'll leave you to come to your own conclusions. Before I share this story, I want to first say that all of these experiences are dreams and sleep paralysis, and that I do not believe that I have been physically harmed or abducted. But given my lack of interest into aliens, UFOs and conspiracies, I also have no idea how these things got into my head either. It all started about 6 months ago. Honestly, I can't think of anything big that had changed in my life, nor can I think of any traumatic experiences that may have triggered these dreams or nightmares. I went to bed, my wife still downstairs finishing up an episode of a TV show she had been watching. I had an early start, and it was probably no later than 10 PM, but I don't remember the exact time, when I attempted to get to sleep. I did, and woke up later with a bad case of pine mouth. I attempted to move but struggled. I couldn't budge. My eyes surveyed the room, which appeared to be closing in on me as an unnatural dread washed over my entire waking body. I started to panic. In my head, I was thrashing about wildly, but in reality, I was struggling to even twitch my hand. My attention was dragged over to the window. The type of windows that we have in our house are the classic type that slide up or down vertically, and as I looked up, the window was wide open, the wind billowing through. It was late autumn at the time, maybe getting on early winter, and me, nor my wife, would not have left the window open. In fact, we wouldn't have opened it at all. I don't know why I was transfixed on the window, but I kept gazing at it. A few moments passed and I jumped slightly as a large, black owl landed on the windowsill facing away from me. I'm no bird watcher, but I'd never seen an owl look as black as this one did. It seemed to consume any light around it. The owl slowly turned its head and revealed that it had hot, glowing eyes. Not one set colour, but more a liquid mixture of red, orange and yellow that seemed to flow and mix with one another like a lava lamp or someone mixing paints. They burnt to look at, and the owl stared deep into my soul. It was invasive, as if it was seeing things I didn't want it to see and that I had no control of it seeing. Its head continued turning, a full 360, and then came back around. And around, and around, speeding up each time. It became a rapid twisting mess, and I couldn't even move to recoil from what I thought would soon be a room painted with owl entrails. This next part literally happened within the blink of an eye. All of a sudden, its head stopped spinning. dead still. It looked right at me, leapt off the windowsill and into the bedroom and flew at my head. Next thing I know, I was screaming, flapping my arms and legs about, and flailing like a madman, my wife, horrified, but comforting me. What's up, she asked, panicked. And I murmured something incoherent and looked over at the window. It was closed. There was no sign of any owl and no sign of me being paralysed. It must have been a dream, I muttered, sweaty and shaken. What must have been a dream? My wife asked. And I looked at her and lied. I claimed I dreamt we were in a car crash. And I was embarrassed and didn't want to say. She comforted me and I drifted off. The next few nights were normal, and I slept soundly and nothing noteworthy happened. It was about a week later when I had the next dream, but I honestly can only remember scraps. I remember a feeling of pure weightlessness and then a cold metal slab against my back. I remember a feeling of physical intrusion around my face, and I remember a bright beaming light and 4 or 5 pairs of shadowy, inhuman hands. And then, again, I woke, in the morning this time, sweating heavier than a murderer in an electric chair. From then till now, I've had dreams almost every night. Some I can barely remember, and others that were too samey, but a few do stand out. Recently, for example, I had another dream, the same feeling of weightlessness. I managed to twist and turn and discovered that I was being carried in the talons of the black owl. After I noticed it, it made a loud, eerie sound. I noticed we were flying towards a plane or a helicopter, some sort of craft in the sky, and the owl turned away and dropped me. I remember vividly falling through the sky and noticing everything from the city was exactly where it should be. Buildings, landmarks, trees and woods. I was reaching terminal velocity and was falling onto the roof of my house. I braced myself and woke up on my bed. It was as dark outside as it had been in my dream, and for a split second, it did feel like I bounced. My heart racing, and I attempted to flick my lamp on. Again, I couldn't move. I was more used to it now, having had multiple episodes over the last few months, and I shut my eyes in an attempt to fall back to sleep. It was weird. I swear it felt like my eyelids were forced open and I was staring at the owl on the sill. It made no noise, nor did it move, but I somehow sensed a disapproval from it. It looked into my soul again, burning and hurting this time. Was all I could muster in my unmoving state. The owl then opened its wings and made the same terrifying noise it had in my dream before flying away. I drifted off soon after. The last dream I'll share with you came about a week into January this year. I had done my normal routine and had fallen to sleep. I was on the metal slab, ice cold on my back, and those inhuman hands were slicing my stomach and having a good old root around. I was panicking and they seemed to notice. One of them came over and for the first time in my experiences, leant forward and revealed its face. I retracted in pure fear. It had a large head, swollen at the top and sharp towards the bottom. Its skin was a rotting flesh grey-green and it had no nostrils or ears, none I could see anyway. Its eyes were like 2 polished ovals of obsidian and its skin was covered in craters and lumps that looked like huge warts. Its mouth was tiny and never opened to reveal if it had teeth or not. Next thing I know, I passed out in my dream, and then again I woke up to being in this weird room. Everything was metal except for a long panoramic window. There were no furnishings other than a single, long step that ran the length of said window. I stood up the step and looked out of the window. I gazed upon the sun, but it was much, much closer than on Earth, and everything around me was black. I appeared to be in space, on some sort of spacecraft. In the window, I saw the reflection of me. I was completely naked and I looked down. I had no cuts on my stomach. I looked back up to see one of those creatures right behind me. It placed a warty hand on my shoulder, and just like that, I woke up in bed, the dawn approaching. I looked up pictures of the sun, and small details on the pictures matched exactly what I had seen in my dream, darker patches and stuff like that. Now, I'm not claiming I've never seen a picture of the sun, but that is pretty crazy. I hid all this from my wife and all of my experiences till just recently. They had begun to put a strain on our relationship, and I'm now doing everything I can to get it off my chest. For those of you who don't believe me, I just want to repeat myself. These were just dreams. I'm not claiming any of this is real at all, but like I say, how does a 40-something-year-old man who has never had any interest in aliens or UFOs suddenly begin dreaming about them so vividly? On a final note, I'll leave you with this. I did some small amount of research into these dreams and stumbled across a few bits of information that claim seeing owls are a precursor to alien abduction. How did my mind know that? Whilst I was studying for my degree, I used to work in a hot dog trailer to get money to pay rent and buy food. Most of the time it was just me and Don, a late 40s balding fat bloke who used to own the trailer. One of his best contracts was situated just outside a Major League Baseball stadium on game day. I'm not really at liberty to say which stadium because, as I'm aware, he still serves dogs there and I don't want to gain him any unwanted attention or whatnot. He was always a nice guy. It's the middle of winter and it's freezing cold and pitch black. I, admittedly, was staying nice and warm due to the ovens and grills, but it was a freezing night and did in fact snow a few days later. So, we get through the main hustle and bustle of fans coming into the game who want to save a bit of money and not pay the stadium prices, and by the time the game begins, our hot dog van is quiet. This happened regularly and we often wouldn't see a customer till after the game. And I'd sit on my phone, reading a book or do college work, and Don would listen to the game on the radio. This night, I was reading and took a break after finishing a chapter. I asked Don if I could make myself a hot dog and he said I could, murmuring he needs the warmth of the grill with a wry smile. I began making one for me and one for him, and I looked out into the dark. Now, for perspective, the stadium was to our left and my sight looked across a plaza and near to something that isn't very busy. Now, I'm not going to tell you what, because it may give the stadium away, when I noticed two bright spots of light dancing across the sky in an almost choreographed display. I called Don over and he looked amazed too. We dismissed it as not being from show lights in the stadium, as they have a trail and reflect off the clouds, whereas this had no trail and was hidden behind the clouds. It's also worth noting that the stadium is located in a metropolis, but we knew the area well and buildings don't move like that. Oh, and yeah, this was a few years before the drone hype, and it wasn't a drone. We followed the two lights for about 5 minutes as they chased one another across the evening sky. The show abruptly ended when the two lights merged into one and then faded out and disappeared. We were absolutely mesmerised. Even after the game, we served fans in utter silence, our jaws hanging open. We very rarely discussed it, to be honest, but we always kept our eyes peeled on game day. We never saw those lights again. I don't want to sound crazy, but I think it was a UFO. It matches the description. Flying lights, unidentified. And I sometimes look back on that evening, and it still seems as surreal now as it did then.
I used to work long hours as an insurance salesman and moved to the retention department not long after. As such, I worked early to late and spent most of my days sat in a computer chair, staring at a monitor and liaising with customers over the phone. It was the new year, 2015, and I noticed that I was beginning to put on weight. I started the standard resolution to do more exercise, and happily bought myself a gym membership for a gym that had opened at a new entertainment plaza a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute jog from my house. Because of my working hours, I went to the gym in the dead of night. It was open 24 hours, and only went 2 or 3 times a week, as I still needed sleep. I get there at about midnight or 1 a.m. and leave at roughly 4 a.m. just as dawn was approaching. So I just hit up a heavy session and was absolutely shattered, almost to the point that I couldn't walk home. I went to check the local bus times, but I was fairly sure they weren't running until 5:30. I began a 2-minute walk towards the bus stop that was down the promenade, if that's what you'd call it. A fancy looking road outside the complex that was for pedestrians, even though it was 2 lanes wide. As I'm walking down, the 6 lampposts that are in front of me start buzzing and flickering ever so slightly. I get hit with a cold blast of air and turn away from the wind. The lampposts behind me are flickering too. They start flickering more and more madly. I got hit with this unnatural, irrational chill of fear. Something that very, very rarely happened to me. All of a sudden, all the lights went dead in synchronicity, and the one I was walking directly under exploded, spraying glass all over me. As soon as this happened, a deafeningly loud whoosh sound came sweeping overhead, sending a second wave of wind washing over me. It sounded like a landing jumbo jet, and at first I crapped my pants thinking a plane was crashing, but there were no lights. In fact, I looked up in a panic and saw nothing. Well, I actually saw the clouds, but no craft, as it was somehow invisible. And then, some of the lights sporadically came back on. And needless to say, despite my tiredness, I bolted it all the way home and thought long and hard about it. There's no way it could have been a small aircraft, due to the raw ferocity of the sound that literally shattered glass like a bomb. Yet, it couldn't have been a large aircraft, or I would have seen it, even if it was behind the clouds with its lights. I have no explanation for this. I would appreciate it if anyone has a good, viable explanation, because I've been racking my head, and I just can't figure it out.
I live on, and grew up on, a farm in southern England. The land our farm encompassed was absolutely massive, and on our land there were a few ancient monoliths and a small group of standing stones. As I say, these were 100% within our land. You'll need to know this for later. These standing stones were nothing like Stonehenge or anything. For those who don't know, England actually has hundreds, maybe even thousands of old monoliths, mounds and standing stones, and the examples on my land were, to be blunt, rather shit. Nevertheless, members of the council, archaeologists and historians have been to inspect, investigate and study the stones, and I'm not allowed to deface, remove or modify the stones in any way. I don't mind. I quite like them, to be honest. They add character in. It's my little thing to protect our heritage. So, my land also has a few rolling hills on either side of the small set of standing stones which reside almost in a valley, though the hills are quite small and the valley wide. Anyway, I own the farm now and regularly tend to the land, but the story I'm about to share with you actually happened to me when I was a 14-year-old boy, and nothing like it has ever happened since, that I'm aware of. My mum and dad used to be the farmers. My father died when I was 21 and my mum has retired and moved away to the city, but at the time I was a rapscallion who had a thirst for adventure. Living on such a massive extent of land, it felt twice as large as a kid. I would find myself discovering new areas of our land all the time. I had been out to the standing stones a couple of times with my father, back when I was much younger, as we used to let the sheep graze on the hills nearby, but at this point in my life, I wouldn't have known how to get there. It was summertime. I don't know if it was the summer solstice. I was young and just don't remember the night this happened. I had been out exploring the land since about 7 p.m. Sometimes I had a friend or two over, sometimes I had one of our dogs, and sometimes, like tonight, I went alone. It was still broad daylight when I left, one of the perks of summer, and was only just starting to go dark at about 10 p.m. when I stumbled across the hills. I ascended the one nearest to me, and as I approached the peak, I could swear that I could hear chanting from the valley below. Just about the only sensible thing I did that night was to crouch down onto my stomach and crawl the rest of the way up the hill. As I reached the crown, I looked down and realised, to my horror, my ears hadn't betrayed me. There was a group of roughly 6 or 7 figures. I'm not too sure on the exact amount. I was so scared. All wearing the same pristine white gowns with pointy hoods. The best way to describe the gowns would be to compare them to the KKK, but these definitely weren't. I watched as they danced around the standing stones on my parents' land. They were dancing primally, chanting incoherent gibberish, and one of them was reading from a very old, red, leather-bound book. It was dark now. Only the firelight from their torches lit the area beneath me. I was still petrified with fear and felt like I was unable to move. I didn't want to be noticed. I continued watching in horror as I saw 2 of the hooded figures leading one of my father's sheep over on a makeshift lead. It's worth noting that, at this time, the sheep weren't grazing on the hills. They were much closer to our house, which is super creepy. They led it to the central pillar where the man holding the book suddenly stopped, clasped the book closed with one hand, and then totally out of the blue began violently clubbing the sheep's head with a rock. I winced, recoiled, and barfed in my mouth slightly. It was now a bloody mess on the floor, shards of skull, clumps of brain matter, and strips of skin all mashed into one sick mess. The man had collected some of the blood in a stone goblet and picked out and tossed away what I can only assume was bone or brain. My mind was running a mile a minute as he cast off his hood and the others bowed. He was old, probably 50 or 60, but actually looked really presentable. He had a well-trimmed beard, nice short hair, and defined, almost chiselled features. He held the goblet up high above him, and I let out an awe-inspired gasp as I saw roughly 15 small specks of light all rush into the centre of the standing stones above his head. They were varying colours from blue, green, red, yellow, and more, and they all merged into one, and then, as if lowering from the heavens, a large disc-shaped object appeared in the sky. It illuminated the whole valley in blinding light, and the main guy also took a bow, and then he drank from the goblet. I couldn't hold in my sick this time, and vomited on the hillside. I then watched as this craft, which is the only way I can describe it, took off into the night sky, disappearing rapidly. Then the whole group creepily dispersed, leaving in opposite directions to one another, not saying a word. I silently bolted home and told my dad everything. He said it was too dark to go back now, but we'd check in the morning. I didn't get much sleep. The next day, we took his quad out to the valley, and to my absolute shock, there was no sheep brains, blood, skin, or anything. The only hint of sheep we found was a small tuft of fur my dad claimed could have ended up there in a million different ways. Creepier still was that my sick on the hillside had also been cleaned up, leading me to believe they somehow knew I was there. Now, after doing a quick head count, my dad also acknowledged that a sheep was missing from his cattle, a sheep we never managed to find. He never contacted the authorities or anything, and was often very edgy when I brought the story up. This is just wild speculation, and I love and miss my dad, but part of me believes he may have had something to do with it, which makes me sick to even think about. Even now, years later, on the rare occasion I do tell this story, I often omit the details of the craft in the sky. It's not that I'm ashamed. It's beyond comprehension in my opinion. The story is utterly crazy as it is, that bit adds another, more confusing piece of evidence to the whole thing, and when I do decide to tell people, they look at me like I'm crazy and it's all in my head. Okay, so this story isn't something that happened to me, but rather something that happened to my great-granddad sometime back in the 1930s. It's been passed down through the family for years and years, and after finding out that no one else had ever shared it or told it elsewhere, I thought I would. As a disclaimer, whilst this story is technically true, do bear in mind that I have been told this and wasn't actually there, nor was I alive in the 30s, so although I'll do my best to remain accurate, I may make some minor errors. My great-grandfather, who was called Theo, used to be a woodcutter in Colorado back sometime in the 1930s. He and his team of workers had a cabin on a hillside at some location that had been lost throughout the years. From what I gather, he basically lived out there. Now, I'm not sure if that was normal for the time, but according to the story, that was what he did. Anyway, apparently, when this happened, it was winter and it was going dark at like 6 or 7 PM. This day, Theo was out past dark, cutting a particularly thick tree. He wanted to finish it that night so he didn't have to come back and waste time finishing it the next day. Apparently, his team had all retired to the cabin and had left him alone in the woods. And that's when he saw it. An odd hovering craft fly above him and stay suspended about 300 feet away on another hillside. Now, this was a time before World War II, which is considered as one of the most technologically advancing times, and at this point, planes could just about fly, let alone hover. According to Theo's account, they looked like a glider, but made of some kind of metal he couldn't identify. It was dark, he said, but he could clearly see the moonlight shining off the metallic exterior and jagged-like shape of it. Now, obviously he shit himself, having never seen anything quite like it in his life, and he just started shouting to the cabin and his co-workers, whom were about 500 feet away. He said the craft then rose higher into the sky, and that he lost sight of it in the darkness. He told his team, who all laughed at him, thinking he was joking, but they would all see odd balls of light and flashes in the sky over the next few weeks. My great-grandfather, apparently, shared this story at any moment he got. In his later years, after technology had become a bit more advanced, he was convinced those woods, I'm not sure of the name of them, were a testing site for some new government technology, though he never identified any known crafters matching what he saw at the time of his death. Me? I have to say that I agree with him. After World War I and with World War II on the horizon, why couldn't it be the latest in military technology? I'm a truck driver and have been for the last 12 years. I'm a male, 42, and consider myself to be quite sane. However, the story I'm about to share with you is something that, even to this day, I have been unable to explain. It happened when I had first started trucking. I was a rookie and was on one of my earliest lone drives, driving through Maine. I was on a lone highway. I honestly cannot remember which one with it being so long ago, but I reckon it was probably I-95. It's the middle of the day, but the stretch of road I'm on is pretty deserted, only the odd oncoming car and, occasionally, one overtaking me. I had my CB tuned in, listening for anyone who wanted to talk, and was chowing down on a sandwich. I remember the sandwich so clearly because the events that happened next made me jump so heavily that I flung the sandwich around the cabin of my truck. Now out of nowhere came this loud whooshing sound, sweeping down from out of the sky and sounding like a jumbo jet. Then came a loud bang, like a bomb had detonated in the sky, actually rocking my vehicle and shattering my driver and passenger side window. I swerved strongly and had to regain control in a panic. Looking in my rearview mirror, I could see a circular cloud in the sky, like a sonic boom, but I could see no aircraft. not to mention, it was dangerously low. I pulled over immediately and looked in awe at the disappearing cloud and scanned the area around me. The sky was empty, there was nothing, and the sky was cloudless and blue. I swear another car was coming on the other side of the interstate, but it didn't stop or anything. I know it's weird that I don't know the exact area this happened in, but in my line of work, everywhere merges into one. But if you're ever in Maine, watch the skies. I'm a Coast Guard based regularly on a beach in Southern California. I still work there, and for privacy reasons, I'll be limiting the details on locations and names for the sake of my professionalism. This happened about 3 years ago when I was a rookie and had just been stationed at the beach I'm still at now. A bit of useless information in that I had to move from Northern California to SoCal for this job, and so everything seemed new to me. I had only ever visited the southern part of the state a handful of times, and it's a very different place. One evening, it's late on and it's the middle of summer. Even by a native's standards, it was hot and it was finally beginning to cool down. It was also starting to go dark, and I was given a patch of sand to go over and check for any belongings, people, or still lit barbecues. Basically, I was patrolling the area to make sure everything was okay before dark. Now, as I was patrolling my stretch of beach, I looked out towards the ocean and noticed some odd white lights on the horizon. I doubled back as I only glimpsed them at first, and yet they were still there. I looked towards the city to see if any lights were reflecting on the ocean, but this patch of beach was pretty isolated. In fact, the entire beach is pretty nice and serene. I looked back in awe, calling my colleague on the walkie-talkie I had. He confirmed he could see it too, and that he couldn't figure out what it was. They were sliding along the horizon extremely fast, not moving up or down, moving side to side, in a straight style. I cannot be sure what happened next, but the lights either disappeared on the horizon or sunk beneath the ocean, and well, that was it, to be honest. Reading this back, it doesn't sound at all spectacular, but actually seeing it was mind-boggling. Me and my colleague both agreed it was weird and didn't seem to match anything that we knew. Could it be some sort of nautical phenomena I'm unaware of? Could it be something more insane like UFOs? Or does it have an entirely natural explanation? Perhaps gases rising to the surface from the ocean or something similar. I don't know, so if anyone reading this has any theories, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I live in Yorkshire, in the United Kingdom. Me and my husband live on a farm we used to tend until we retired. My eldest son now runs the farm, and we live in a converted barn on the land. My husband, in his twilight years, is obsessed with making the most of his final years, whereas I am now at the point that I just want to relax and take it easy. As such, I am the one who tends to walk our Irish setter, Jules, whilst he's out playing golf, or swimming, or at the gym, or whatever else he can think of doing. I don't mind walking Jules. He's nearly as old as me, and we tend to take the walks nice and slow. Despite this, and my new outlook of life, when we go walking, we do tend to take some tougher trails leading up to tall peaks. We do this because, despite our age, we are used to it. We've been doing it for decades. These trails also mean that you often don't see people other than the odd hiker on the warmer days and weekends, and you certainly don't tend to see dog walkers. Just the right amount of peace and tranquility I need. The night this occurred, it had been a warm summer's day, and I had spent the day in the garden tending to some flowers, and the evening cooking tea for me and my husband. It was 9 o'clock when it dawned on me that I hadn't taken Jules for a walk. I got my coat on ready to take him. It wasn't dangerous for me, the trails would be barren at this time, and I had taken him this late on occasion before. So, I suppose I better explain what this hill is like. It's quite a steep incline to be honest, and takes anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes depending on how fast we take it on the way. At the top of the hill, it plateaus out for about a mile and then the decline is at the same angle on the other side, but the trail forks. It goes straight down one way and wraps around the hill the other way, joining the same path we would take up about 3/4 of the way down. We reached the top of our hill and Jules has collapsed as he usually does and is panting. I give him some water out of my bottle and sit beneath a tree next to him, stroking the back of his ear softly. From the top of the hill, you had a great panoramic view of the surrounding area, including the small town that was in the valley below. I was looking down towards the town, enjoying the twinkle of the lights which were like stars beneath me. A plane passed overhead and then stopped and hovered above the town. Wait, it wasn't a plane. I thought back and if my memory served me, it had passed overhead silently. I looked on at the plane, which was silent and unmoving. All of a sudden, it beamed a bright light to reveal that this behemoth craft was disc-shaped. This experience lasted no more than 2 minutes before the craft slowly quaked back towards me. I cowered under the tree, and my dog's heckles were raised. Even with my acute arthritis, we pretty much ran the whole way back down the trail, the way we had come, and back to my house. I inexplicably began crying and felt obliged to phone the police, who treated me as though I was crazy. They found no evidence to suggest anything unidentified was in the airspace above the town that night. Picture me, a semi-successful lawyer based in Chicago, 42 years old, married with my long-term partner, have 3 kids, a house, and a nice car. I'm not saying any of this to brag, just to show you I'm an average guy. I actually work for another law firm now, but at the time this happened, I was working for a small, now defunct firm known as Jaspers, and at the time we had just moved into new offices and were pretty high up in a skyscraper. One night, I was working late, very late, on an important case and stayed behind in my office. It was roughly 1 AM. I was working hard, to the point I was working a sweat, just being sat in my office chair. I had just about finished the work for the night and was getting ready to leave. Before I left, I went to open the curtains I had closed earlier in the evening, mainly because I don't like walking into my office in low light. Don't know why, just don't. I opened the curtains, which slid across and over to me. I looked out across the city and fell backwards in shock at no less than 4 small craft whizzing about the skyline. I watched as these shapeless objects performed the most remarkable of manoeuvres, and they seemed to constantly be changing shape and form. I reached for my cell to record what I was seeing. I still have the footage now if anyone wants to see it, but it's grainy and shaky and you can barely make them out against the sky. These things performed this show for about 5 minutes. The whole time I stood in awe. The 4 crafts then assembled so it appeared that they were stacked one on top of the other, and then they slowly ascended higher and higher until I lost sight of them in the sky. I rewatched the footage and was disappointed at how terrible it actually was. I went home and didn't tell my wife about this. In fact, I only told my shrink a couple of weeks ago, whom urged me to share this to clear my mind. So that's it. Nothing added or embellished. Nothing removed or omitted. That's my one unexplained experience. Hey guys, this is Brothers Jackson. That was 14 UFO extraterrestrial stories. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I want to give a huge shout out to Goodnite Goosebumps for narrating a couple of the stories on this for me. Go check his channel out, there's a link to it in the description below. As always, let me know if there's any videos you want to see made in the future. Give this video a like, subscribe, comment, and be sure to tune in for my next video. Thank you so much, guys. Peace.